Today I'm going to take you through my process of drawing a diary cartoon inspired by real references such as this flock of sacred ibises. I call it commuter flight because they pass over my house each day going to and from the local dump. These birds are scavengers, and as you can see they have a very distinctive anatomy with a very, very long beak at a certain angle. And so I always start off with a photo reference and I trace it. This is something you can do, as I'm doing, digitally with Photoshop or on your iPad, but you can also do it just as easily by printing out a photograph you found off Google and putting a piece of baking paper or wax-proof paper over it and using it to trace. As you can see, when I trace, I use incredibly rough strokes because I'm really just looking to build a little bit of muscle memory as I figure out how this bird's anatomy all works together. And once I've used these really rough strokes to work out the anatomy, I go and test out my observations by trying very gently and roughly to reproduce what I've traced right next to where I traced it. So here you can see it's not quite perfect, but it's close enough and it should have enough character by the time I'm finished to be able to start using it and translating it into more of a cartoony looking bird. As I'm going to need a few of these birds for a group, I trace them and copy them a couple of times so that I get a whole load of variations of the same similar character. And then it's time to think about the posture or the movement of this bird. And so once again, I pick up a reference, a photo reference, and I start to trace. This reinforces the work that I've done on the bird's head because obviously it's in a very similar position with the same anatomy, and it also gives me an opportunity to explore the body anatomy of the bird so that I can start to reproduce that myself as well. As you can see, once again, I'm working extremely roughly using these very sketchy circles just to isolate certain components of the body so that I can put it together in a way that helps me to reproduce it when I want to draw it freehand a bit later. And then once again, it's time to test my powers of observation, just as I did when I was only drawing the head, by quickly reconstructing the tracing that I've done freehand next to it so that I've got a reference to look at, and I'm trying to use exactly the same components that I traced, but now obviously using my hand-eye coordination to come up with something which is very, very similar, and seeing how well I've managed to understand the proportions of the various parts of this bird. Now it's time to start putting the vision into place, creating a cartoon. And as I mentioned, these birds remind me of a commuter flight because they're effectively going to and from work as they go back and forth to the garbage dump. And that reminds me of executives catching a flight to a different city to go to the office. So I decided I wanted 3 birds in the frame because 3 is always a good number in art. And I wanted them to be in different stages of walking so that their legs were interesting rather than being full of repetition. And here I am just playing around with the position of the birds in relation to each other and just doing the bottom of their bodies and their legs so that I can start to get to grips with how I'm going to position them. Then it's going to be time to actually put them into the frame with the background as they head out across the tarmac with their briefcases under their wings, going off to catch their flight to the office. And that brings me to a rough sketch which I can now start to use outlines and colour on to produce a polished final result. But that is a time-consuming project that I'll save for another day. In the meantime, let's summarise my process. First, I start out with tracing close-ups of the head and make sure that I have a handle on the bird's anatomy. Then I go on to the full body and the legs, and finally it's time to slot all of that into the background scene. Did you like this video? If you did, please head on over to YouTube and subscribe to my channel there. And if you'd like even more updates that I only share on email, go over to www.alisonbeere.com and sign up for email updates.